So today we're going back to talking about death, and it's, you're getting used to it, I hope, sort of important but hard to keep track of the page numbers because of the way I've cut it up in different form. But it ought to begin to already impress you that we've talked about guilt and we talked about resoluteness without talking about death, although the death chapter is prior to them. So that Heidegger is going to have to go through the awkward move of next time bringing back the story of death, put it again after guilt. Remember, the way the book is actually written, we were supposed to have done death already, and then guilt. But that's not how we're reading it. So sometimes you've got to just keep in mind that we've done guilt, because that's the past, and that gets you resoluteness. And today we're going to do death, and then next time, Heidegger's finally got to do the job, which he had to do anyway, but not in that crazy order, get the resoluteness together with anticipation. That is, get guilt together with death, and get anticipatory resoluteness as the way of life that a Dasein lives when it is authentic, that is, when it manifests in what it does transparently, or Hoagland has a nice new term, I just realized, lucidly, what it is to be Dasein. And Hoagland says, and I think this is right, Heidegger uses the term explicitly, ausdrücklich, but that makes it sound as if you could say what it is and sort of have a credo for being authentic, and that's not how it is at all. It's a way of understanding that is coping with yourself and other Daseins and the world, but you can do that lucidly, meaning, and now we have a word from Kierkegaard, transparently, which is Kierkegaard's way of avoiding it. When you say lucidly or transparently, you don't mean something that you can put into propositional form and state explicitly. So now that's just a parenthetical. So next time we will get to the way you live at a formal level. Of course, everybody has to do it their own specific way, but the general shape of the life that you live, if you manifest transparently or lucidly in your activity what Dasein essentially is, instead of covering up, which you can do, what Dasein essentially is. And what is Dasein essentially? Well, it's the throwing, projecting, falling, being, whom I think, although it isn't so clear in Being and Time, the main job description is being a world discloser. But we won't talk much about that unless we talk about Carol White's introduction to the paper I put on the website. So there's a kind of problem. I might as well just find out now what you want to do. I'm open to, they're just two different something or others on the table, though not utterly unrelated to each other. Namely, the assignment that we read for this time about death as treated in Being and Time, and my paper that I put on the website, which tries to sort of position the comments on death in Being and Time in a broader context, following Carol White, in which the death of cultures and the death of understandings of being plays a more important role than the death of individuals. I take it. Here's my proposal. At first I'd talk a little while about our assignment, and then we discuss that, and then if there's still time, we discuss how many read the piece I put on the website. Not more, not even half. Okay, well, then, and you don't have to. I think it's really illuminating, her book, and therefore my talking about her book is also really illuminating, but it's not necessary for understanding what goes on in Being and Time. It's more like it prevents certain misunderstandings of what is going on in Being and Time, but we can prevent them anyway. So anybody want to say anything? Is there any better way to do it? I really wish I could just go back and forth between them, but I don't think you're able to do it given what you've read. I don't think I'm able to do it just keeping too many things open on my desktop. I'll crash. So Let's go to this. Starting with a running start. That is a quick review of last time, because it's so important to keep from getting lost in the death chapter. Much more easy to get lost in than the guilt chapter. But on the same grounds, it's important to realize that when you do this kind of hermeneutic understanding, you want to get at the essence of death and guilt, and you want to do it by sort of getting an overall picture of Dasein in which these various components fit together in a holistic way and then reinforce each other. The method you have to use is formal indication. That means you have to start with not only isolatable components like death and guilt separately, and resoluteness and anticipatory resoluteness separately, and finally put them together. That's part of what makes it hard. But what makes it even much harder is if you do formal indication, you have to start with an understanding of whatever you're going to be talking about. In this case, death, and last time, guilt. An understanding of it which is wrong, which is a cover-up, which is not a distortion, it's an understatement. It's a 180-degree wrong denial of exactly what death is or guilt is. And we saw it last time, but I want to remind you. So guilt normally means that you're responsible for some bad thing you've done, or that you're responsible for obeying the laws and the standards and principles of your society, and you've broken the law. You owe something. You have to go to prison to make up for it, and so forth. All that talk, and of course conscience too, tells you what the laws are and tells you when you've broken them, the moral principles and so forth. All that isn't just wrong about ontological guilt. I mean, Heidegger's not going to tell you that's wrong about the ordinary meaning of guilt. That's a good analysis. I didn't do it elegantly, but you could make a good analysis of the ordinary meaning of guilt based on how it looks when you just look at the phenomenon at first sight. That's what I was just saying. Guilt is indebtedness and owing something and obeying rules and so forth. You have to start with that, because that's how we normally take it. But you know when you start that if you work it out, you'll discover that ontological guilt, as opposed to sort of common sense understanding of guilt, the real structure that the word guilt is guilt is pointing to, the word guilt is pointing to, the real phenomenon is buried and covered up. And moreover, and this is something I think Heidegger really thinks, but he doesn't say it except once, I think, in passing, and I wouldn't know how to open to it right away, but it's not just covered up, but it's a motivated cover-up that is trying to exactly deny what guilt and death really as ontological structures of Dasein are. And therefore, the wrong answer is a clue to the right answer. Because if you can see that if you can understand what guilt is denying, namely that there is no basis for what you ought to do, and conscience doesn't give you rules and scold you when you do wrong things. Conscience is silent. It's a silent kind of call. If you see that the putting a voice into conscience, putting guilt and indebtedness, responsibility, and so forth into the notion of guilt, is precisely to cover up that there aren't any moral guidelines and you don't owe anybody anything specific and so forth. That's going to be a clue to the right answer. And I'll say this one more time. It's the more semblance, the more truth, or something like that, Heidegger says. I'll have to find the line that I see as I talk that I should have looked for. But anyway, the point is, you've got to see that we're going to be told a story about death, which is dead wrong, you might say. Okay, well, you want to say something?
Would Heidegger say there's no...
We had this, will you hear I see.
No.
Okay, well, I got to think about this a minute, whether I want to, we might just think back into a discussion that was the first meeting, but I'll see if I can say something that doesn't start a whole discussion again. Heidegger thinks there are wrong ways of behaving, ways that cover up what it is to be Dasein. But those ways of behaving might well be obeying the moral law, and doing whatever you do in a way that you can generalize it. What's the word in the Kantians use? Universalize it. I mean, if you're doing stuff that's universalizable, that's certainly a clue that it's wrong. Because remember that the phronomist responds to the unique situation. So Heidegger has plenty to say about all the wrong ways that one acts in order to cover up the true structure of Dasein. But I'm trying to think, is there anything I can say about, well, you could say very formal things like Dasein responds to the unique situation, and consciousness calls Dasein to respond to the unique situation, but it's a silent call because it doesn't tell you anything. And it doesn't say treat people as means, as ends and never as means, or love your neighbor, or do unto them as you would have them do unto you, or more specific things like vote when an election comes around. It doesn't say anything like any of that. So it's, in the end, I don't know whether to say it gives you moral guidelines or not. I mean, let's say it tells you a wrong way to behave when you're Dasein. It tells you in a very abstract way the right way to behave when you're Dasein. It gives you no specific guidance of how to act in specific situations, according to Heidegger. If conscience is telling you, this is to put it in the most provocative way, if conscience is telling you what to do and what not to do, you can be sure that that's a cover-up, because that's telling you general things. And that's not that those aren't better than nothing. I mean, it may be better to be told the general thing that you should help beggars instead of kill them, but it doesn't help you really know whether when somebody asks for money on the street in Berkeley, you should give them money. Each case is unique. Now, there was one more thing I wanted to say about it. Okay, yes, so you could be sure, back to your question, if conscience is telling you rules and principles that are universalizable and rational, or based on revelation, or based on human nature, or just based on the way your parents socialized you, if your consciousness is giving you advice about how to behave and telling you when you're doing wrong, in any of those ways, you can be sure that it's covering up, not doing what you should be doing. So, again, but I'm trying to think clearly. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do what one does. I mean, it's better to do what one does in your culture than to do outrageous things that one doesn't do at all, I guess. Though, in the back of my mind, I'm teaching Fear and Trembling right now, and Abraham's the hero for being ready to kill Isaac. I mean, Heidegger, I think, is sort of in the Kierkegaard tradition in the sense that you can be called, if you're really a world-disclosing being, you can be called to do things that look, on the basis of the current ethics of the culture, as outrageously wrong. And so you can't even say what I just said. You should trust it if it tells you at least at first approximation what one does. Because it may be just absolutely wrong what one does, or totally stupid and silly. I mean, you have me in other courses know my favorite example of this is if your conscience tells you should send Christmas cards and it's telling you you failed to do something you should and now you owe everybody a Christmas card, that's not just wrong, it's silly, and it's, I mean, particularly, I mean, if there are people across the street who send me Christmas cards, then it covers up the idea that whatever it is that you could do to, relate to other people in some daily, unique, interesting way. Okay, I don't know if I've helped any. Does that help any? I to say sort of a summary, I guess, of what we may have come to last time. Okay, I'm going back to this. Where were we? Okay, this is still supposed to be an introduction, so let me get through it fast. So, I forgot. And just again, and why is consciousness calling you to all these sort of high-level, deep, religious, rational, and trivial things that you should be doing and haven't, or should be doing and are doing, and so forth. Why is it doing all that? Because of the unsettledness of Dasein. There isn't any way to find out, because Dasein has no normal sort of nature. What is natural, what God wants, what reason demands, and so forth. And now I get back to where I was. It's not only not telling you what's what, it's covering up this way that we are not able, unsettled, ungrounded. There is no way to appeal to any specific principles of any sort to guide you or justify what you do. It's a very existentialist point, and it starts with Kierkegaard, I presume, or with Pascal, maybe. Okay, now let's see. Okay, so now we're going to go on to death. That was supposed to prepare you for how hard the death chapter is, because when you start with an ordinary sense of death, just as you started with guilt, with the ordinary understanding of guilt. That's what happens in formal indication. You've got to start where you are. But in the normal sense of death is certainly something that happens to people at the end of their life. Something that happens to people on their deathbed. What John Hoagland calls croaking. That's what it's about. And that's exactly not. I mean, it's got to be not only wrong, but sort of motivatedly wrong. That is, it's got to be a cover-up. Why would it be a cover-up to think that death had something to do with what happened at the end of your life? Well, because whatever it is, you can then think of it as something in the future. Didn't I say this last time? I'm beginning to sound as if I heard myself. You begin to think of this as something in the future, well, the word's going to be demise, finally, this demise, this final event. You think of this thing as something in the future. It isn't even a normal event, because it's gone. By the time it happens, you're not there anymore. But you think of it as in the future, and thereby sort of not right now. Well, that's rather reassuring. And then thereby you can take all these homeopathic medicines will make you live longer, and exercise every day, and that'll make you live longer, and don't do stupid things where you might get hurt and so forth. There are ways to postpone seemingly indefinitely, because why shouldn't it always be in the future? You're ceasing to exist. So the very idea that demise is about something that's going to happen to you in the future but isn't happening to you right now is not only wrong, it's covering up your somehow a kind of emptiness, a kind of unsettledness, a kind of nullity, which is structurally part of Dasein, and which Dasein is in all the time, or lives all, it's structure. Whatever death is, it's going to turn out to be some structural characteristic of Dasein, and it's not going to turn out to be an event in the future which hasn't happened yet and may not happen for a while. So I told you both that the common sense meaning of death is demise, and that it's not just any old mistake that you might think it is. It wants to cover up something and get a kind of control on something. In another Heidegger way of talking, death, authentic ontological death, makes you constantly anxious in a positive sort of way. But turning death into an event in the future makes it something you can fear. And already fearing it, then you can avoid it, try to prevent it, at least delay it, and so forth. And that's much more reassuring than anxiety. Okay, so that's the formal indications thing. We know we're going to have to start with an event that happens to people, terminal event in people's lives, where they just get annihilated, and we know that that's not going to be what death is. But whatever death is, that's a denial of it, a cover of it. Okay, so now we get to what death is. But we don't get there very directly. This is a very hard chapter and very confusing, and it's given rise to those of you who've read the Carol White piece, who at least, I don't know how many I listed finally, I didn't count them, about 10 different, very different, and all wrong, every one of them, the interpretations of what, according to Heidegger, death is. And why is this chapter so hard? Because Heidegger, again, it's the formal indication story. Heidegger starts by telling you what everyday understanding of death is, and then he says he's ontologizing it and formalizing it. But so to speak, bit by bit, he gets it more ontologized and formalized as he goes through the chapter. And the trouble is, you never can tell quite exactly when he's finally said what death really is and gotten rid of all the cover-up. I mean, I couldn't tell you. Maybe one of you can tell me if you do come to office hours. What? I think I sort of know roughly where it is. At what point does he finally get to the formal, ontological, correct, essential description of that structural phenomenon of Dasein which we misname but nonetheless indicate? You know, it's this, we're pointing at it even though we're using the wrong properties to point at it. What we're trying to get to when we talk about death. And so now we go through, and I'm just going to tell you sort of there are these stages in the account. There seem to be at least 4 stages. Even if you reorder the book and make it into a linear argument of some sort, it's still hard to see, though it's linear in some sense, what the steps are in this story. So first there's the everyday interpretation. That's what I was giving you already. So you know one dies. And that's a tranquilizing fact about events far off in the future and not applying to you but just one in general. It isn't that Lord Dreyfus dies. In fact, is dying right now in some sense, but it's this general thing that one dies and one dies some other time. Now, so clearly, that's not what he's talking about. And then there seems to be something like an existentialist account, in which you live somehow facing up to this terminal event, which is normally called dying or death, and which Heidegger calls demise. I have to do this in funny order. I'm not ready. We could define demise right now, but it will just complicate things. So just think of it as good old death. The existentialist thing is, well, what attitude should you have toward this death? And it's clearly not the event at the end of your life that matters. It's how you relate to the event at the end of your life that matters. That's already pretty much a definition of demise. Demise is perishing, which is just what animals do too, but perishing the way humans perish, and the way humans perish, and that means taking a stand on the fact that we organisms perish, and that stand takes that event of perishing and gives it a meaning. And depending on what meaning you give it, you live one way of life or another. But so the existentialist move is then how to live in terms of this final fact. The Dasein that faces the possibility, quote, on 294, the possibility of no longer being able to be there. That it's just, there are all kinds of possible stands on this. The most interesting one is really Sartre, because Sartre criticizes Heidegger on death in Being and Time, because he thinks that Heidegger must mean that there is this, that death must be the name for this kind of annihilation that's going to happen to you at the end of your life. And then when Heidegger says in effect that you could live in terms of it, Sartre says, if you lived in terms of it, if you thought about how absolutely, how totally you're going to be wiped out and not that all you care about will be wiped out, but you're caring about everything will be wiped out and so forth, there'd be no reason for you to do anything rather than anything else. You know the story of the wall? I mean, how many know Sartre's story of the wall? When somebody's sentenced to death, and the next morning, they will be killed. And overnight, they get clearer and clearer about what it is that they're going to happen to them the next morning. And by the next morning, it's sort of like a Dostoevsky story. When they're before the firing squad, they suddenly get pardoned. And then, that they've given up, they've sort of distanced themselves from the person they loved and the cause they're serving and the friends that they are protecting and everything, so that when they finally find out that they're not going to die, the end of the short story is the guy just falls on the ground laughing because there's nothing anymore that it makes sense to do. Well, that's an existentialist view of death, all right, and it certainly isn't what Heidegger is interested in. It isn't as if he even exactly wants to deny it. It's just that he's not interested in what, or he's not going to tell you about anyway. The book, the ontology of it isn't going to tell you about how you should feel about the fact that at the end of your life you're going to be wiped out and all you're caring about anything is going to be wiped out. That's not the question. Now, here's already the first confusing thing, and if anybody can tell me how to fix it, I would be happy. Remember that there is then a footnote to Ivan Ilyin's death, the Tolstoy story. And I can't understand why Heidegger's got it in there, because that looks like an existentialist account of somebody on their deathbed and what they're learning when they're on their deathbed. Yeah, you want to find it, and we'll look at it? But maybe if we looked at it, somebody could explain to me what's going on there. Where is it? It's in the footnotes. Anybody found it? 495. Why did he do this? We haven't got enough troubles already. Where is it in 495? In the English? I don't see it yet. Note 12. On page 495. Oh yeah, in this aspect is along the same. In this story, the death of Ivan Ilyich, in his story, the death, Tolstoy has presented the phenomena of the disruption and breakdown of having someone die. That's already wrong. It isn't having someone die. And it's true, it talks about that, but it talks a lot more about what it feels like to be dying. And both are just existential, and it's nothing that Heidegger could be interested in. What it tells you. How many read The Death of Ivan Ilyich? I mean, it's not very many. Well, that's interesting. It's a story about how he feels more and more withdrawn because he sees that it's not, that his death isn't important to anybody the way it's important to him, not even to his family, not even to his wife. And he also feels that he's wasted his whole life, and that's all very touching, but it just isn't the point. Yeah. That's why it's having someone to just die. That's right. It's inconvenient to the family that there he is in his bedroom dying, and they're trying to go on with their life's work. Good. Well, you fixed it. I mean, I've always thought he was, but that's not really what Tolstoy's interested in, I don't think. A very tiny part of it. I don't know if Heidegger's a very good reader of actual texts, but he gets interesting things out of them, even though they may not be very important to the text. Okay, so that's another example of sort of actual croaking and what effect it has on the people who are doing it and the people around them. And I just remembered something so crazy that I'll tell you, because it's just an anecdote, but it's amazing. And not very complimentary to Heidegger, I must say, but it's, when Heidegger had been barred from teaching, he was desperate to get in touch with the rest of the world. He was so desperate that he talked to me for an afternoon, and that's pretty desperate if you're Heidegger. But because I had written him and said I was going to teach him at MIT, and he was so happy. But he also wanted to talk to Sartre. So there's a letter from him to Sartre, in which he says to Sartre, I understand your criticism, and Sartre's criticism of Heidegger's view of death is, of course, all wrong. It's the criticism that I told you already, in the wall, that if you actually thought about your death, you'd be paralyzed and not be able to do anything. The best way to act, Sartre says, in effect, is to cover it up. You have to cover it up if you're going to go on living. Heidegger writes a letter to Sartre, says, I see what you're saying. Yes, I accept your criticism of my view about death. And now, I see that we're on the same path. Well, why don't you come by and talk? In effect, and I gather, reading Fransky, really, he set up a meeting with Sartre. And Sartre had the good sense not to come. I don't know whether he just stood him up or said, I'm sorry. But when I talked to Heidegger, who, as I say, was desperate, he had on his desk Sartre being in nothingness, because now reading this biography, I see that he was preparing, hopefully, for this visit of Sartre. But when I said, I see you're reading Sartre, what do you think about it? And he said, these relations, in fact, I'm fine. How can I begin to read such rubbish? Or maybe such crap, I don't know. I mean, more like that, right? Yes. I mean, that's what, he never believed a word of it. Anyway, he's just a total hypocrite, and I don't think we can do anything about it. Let's separate the man from the book. That's the moral of that. Okay, back to where we were. The next one, after the everyday reading and the existentialist reading, then we get to Heidegger, who says he's doing a formal ontological, existential, not existential, which is existential will, but a full existential conception of death is what he wants. Now it's time. By the way, I see that I wrote something that fits with what Eugene said. On 308 is where he's saying what it is that Tolstoy, if I can get my book untangled here, 308. Suddenly my book seems to be going backwards. Let's try it this way. Okay, good. 308. What do I say about it there? This is what he thinks psychoanalysis is about, I now understand. So I want to look it up. Yes, about 10 lines down, when we're facing our death, it makes manifest that all being alongside the things of which we concern ourselves and all being with others will fail us when our own most ability to be is the issue. Now, it's interesting that, and he says Tolstoy sees that, and he does. What's strange is that Heidegger, who's now in the middle of his existential projection of authentic being towards death, which starts on 304, is ready to bring that in as part of the true structure of death, that namely at the top of the page that it's non-relational. And this is supposed to say that it's non-relational. And we're skipping a little bit. If concern and solicitude fail us, this does not signify at all that these ways of Dasein have been cut off from its authentically being itself. As structures essential to Dasein, they are still there, and so forth. Well, what I'm going to say is, I don't know what level of analysis this is. It sounds sort of existential, that existential, that other relations, the relations with others will fail us. I don't know what it is, because is it really structural? Is it true that all relations with others will have to fail us when we're on our deathbed? Love can't transcend that, or commitment to some incredible cause that keeps you going to do something or other? Again, I just don't know. He's going through a whole lot of characteristics of death here, and he says he's doing an existential discussion of them. So I guess we're supposed to think that it's a necessary structural feature of having the right relation to demise, which is that you will become isolated. This gets Heidegger into all sorts of trouble, because now I don't know whether I can find this, because I wasn't going to say it. Help me find it. There's a place where he talks about Dasein's existential solipsism. Anybody remember that? Habermas gets onto that and gets very concerned about it. And this is all tied in with the non-relational thing. Maybe it's under anxiety and not under death. It could be in either place. I doubt if we could find it. Oh boy, 233. Oh, it is back in anxiety. But it's tied up with this thing that Heidegger shouldn't be saying, I think, that there is, or if he is, well, maybe it's all right for him to say it, I don't know. But it's not all right for Habermas to think that Heidegger is thereby saying that Dasein is, in some sense, totally independent and really independent and self-sufficient. On 233 in italics, he's talking about anxiety, and it individualizes. It makes plain that with the phenomenon of anxiety, a distinctive disposedness, there's a theme of interpretation. Anxiety individuates Dasein and discloses it as solus ipse. That means isolated by itself. Well, I don't know what's the exact translation. Anybody know Latin? Alone itself. And this existential solicism, and now, the Habermas and Tugendhat too, stop with that and say, aha, Heidegger thinks that human beings are ultimately self-sufficient and isolated. That's just so wrong. I mean, that's just so Cartesian, where every individual self-contained mind is off in its warm room doing geometry or writing philosophy or whatever. And of course, Heidegger thinks that it's part of Dasein's structure to be being in the world. And that's the next sentence. Anxiety individuates Dasein and discloses it as solus ipse. But this existential solicism is so far from the displacement of putting an isolated subject into an emptiness of worldless occurring. In an extreme sense, what it does is precisely to bring Dasein face to face with its world as world, with itself as being in the world. And, of course, that includes being with others. So I don't know, back to where we were now, what is going on. I don't have, most of the stuff I just don't know what's going on. Lots of the time. How isolated is Dasein when it's dying, and what difference does it make? Because it isn't as if we're going to reveal the fact that we were and we always will be alone, some dramatic thing like that. Where were we on 308, right? So there's a problem. Ask yourself, sort of, why is Heidegger so sure that death is non-relational, and what does he expect to get out of it, and what is it supposed to reveal about Dasein? Yeah, Eugene.
The first thing is it must be taken over by Dasein alone. That's the part about how no one can do it for you and you can't do it together.
Ah, that's fine. Good. That's true. Just you have to do alone. Nobody can do it for you. But if that's all that non-relational means, that's interesting. Let's see. Let's look and see if there's any clue there. I read it to refer back to the anxiety condition of being alone. Dasein lays claim to death as Dasein, as an individual Dasein. That's fine. As understood, it individualizes Dasein down to itself. It makes manifest that all being alongside things if we concern ourselves and all being with others will fail us when our own most potentiality for being is an issue. Isn't that wrong? I mean, why should he say that? I mean, you're right, that's what he thinks. That death individuates us, but that's what leads people like Habermas to think, that he thinks that when, so to speak, when the chips are down, then all our relation to everything but ourselves is just canceled, or not important, or seems to be not important. That can't be what it says. What does it say? Try again.
Well, I thought it was three different things. I couldn't tell what the relation is to it, but there's no one can do it for you, it individuates you, and after death you have...
Certainly after death you have no relation to anything. I don't think that's one of the things he's talking about. Really? Huh. That sounds wrong to me. Let's try the first two. Okay. Yeah, I think you do have to do it alone. But I'm not sure that he really has a right to say it's individuating, but what he certainly doesn't seem to have a right to say is that just because you have to do it alone, you are isolated from, that all concern for others and for other things fails you. I see that it fails you if you expect any help, that somebody should hold your hand. But that it fails you in any stronger sense, it doesn't. Well, But then it's wrong to call that non-relational, isn't it? Let me try it again. Being alongside things will fail us or not. Then can be authentic only if it makes this possible for itself its own accord. But if concerns us will fail us, this does not signify at all. These ways of Dasein have been cut off from its authentic beginning stuff. So they fail us only in the sense that we have to die our death ourselves. That's the right way to read it, I guess. That's what you wanted to say. But it makes it.
It brings you into your unique situation.
It brings you into your unique situation. In that sense, it individualizes it. Well, except that then why do the other things with which we concern ourselves fail us? Why aren't they part of our unique situation?
They can't get you out of it.
Because they can't get you out of it. That's true. Yeah.
I think there's also a notion of estrangement on the unheimlich or on the homelessness, where on 233, if we kept reading, he goes down to the last part of the second paragraph. He says, as Dasein falls, anxiety brings it back from its absorption in the world. Everyday familiarity collapses. Dasein has been individualized, but individualized as being in the world. Being in enters into the existential mode of the not at home. Nothing else is meant by our talk.
Where are you? Oh, I'm being...
233, just right after 189 in the Buddhism.
Oh, okay. I see. That's fine.
That whole paragraph. So, we're not individualized in the sense that we're completely pulled out of the world or something of, counter estrangement. Our world is not
okay.
We are world, we're also...
And so everyday familiarity collapses. We should put the emphasis on everyday. The kind of familiarity that you get from as the one, and you sort of how things normally matter and how we normally deal with them, and all that collapses.
So much that we don't recognize that we're...
Yeah,
because
we're still in a room. That we're still in a familiar room and all that.
In some ways, in this case of estrangement that Heidegger is trying to bring out the phenomena of, that world even becomes more present to us, even though we become estranged from it. It seems like he wants to make both of them explicit. We're not.
Okay, yes, it's a world that we have to get back in touch with somehow, although we're
not completely solipsistic. It seems like part of the anxiety is that we recognize that we are worlded creatures and we have an estrangement from that world.
That we have to get, and we better get, and that's not our true state. It sounds like, it sometimes sounds like, and I think that's the view I'm trying to both explain and hopefully resist, that you get more and more authentic when you get estranged and cut off from others and from the familiar. And that's the wrong way to think about it. Okay, so because it ought to say, well, that being in the world is essential to Dasein, and it stays that way even when it's dying, and even when it's having its getting in touch with anxiety, would better still be in the world with people and so forth. You look worried. Are you worried? Good.
No one can take away your death from you, but also no one can get you out of the breakdown situation. Like if you have a breakdown with a hammer, someone can give you a better hammer, and then someone else fixes your breakdown. But if you have anxiety, no one can
can help you out of it. Well, that's good. Let's read it Eugene's way. So it says anxiety and death are isolating in the sense that nobody can help you get out of them or feel at home in them. You've got to get out of them by feeling at home in them, really. They're on your own. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I didn't make people help you to an extent, but there's something that you have to do yourself.
Where does he talk about this? In that one. I read that one lately, but I don't remember that. But he may be onto something about the relation of this to depression. What's that?
He almost treats them as the same phenomenon.
He does. He thinks depression and anxiety are the same. I would get all upset and annoyed about that if it weren't that later Heidegger comes to say the same thing. But only after he's had therapy and gotten over his defensive anxiety and the Grunze-Finlichkeit, the most revealing exposedness. Better not think that depression is our most revealing or a mood. That would be, and then in a way, that's what. So Bill shouldn't be in being in time anyway. I think treating him like depression. Tyler, did you have your hand up? Say loud, because. Yeah, we said that, right? I think so. They don't fail you in your particular things of bringing you morphine or something. You don't think that's the right thing? Well, you guys will have to discuss with it. What do you?
Well, that's the stronger part that you read. It all being alongside
collapses or fails you. Yeah, why? What's failing you? I see. That's all you. That's the only thing that would matter at this point is that they could die for you and they can't, and in that sense they fail you. Okay, well that sounds good. I mean, you're really just taking, which is good. You don't really disagree with Eugene. Because you're both saying the way it works is that death is such that nobody can save you from it, or die for you, and that means that on that point, at that level, they are irrelevant. Everybody and everything is failing you and irrelevant for you. That's what you both think. Yeah.
People can't die with you. That's going to be alone.
Well, he could have meant that, but in the text it's clear that he doesn't. It means stand in for you. I can't quote the sentence, but that's what it's certainly about. Yeah. 294, stronger things. Okay, let's look.
So, like, 2/3 of the way down, where he introduces non-relational, right before that he says, when Dasein stands before itself in its way, all its relations to any other Dasein have been undone.
Yeah, that's the stronger one, all right. And that's really the one that gets him into trouble, because if Dasein is being with, then you couldn't be in a state of where it looks like in authentic dying as well as inauthentic dying, all relations to others are undone, and that means then you begin to think like Habermas and Tugendhat. Well, look at that. Authentic Dasein doesn't need anybody. Yeah, so that's unfortunate. I didn't mark where you saw it. Where is it? Okay, I see. Death is the possibility of the absolute impossibility of Dasein. Yes. Okay, what's that then? Except there's a distinctively impending. I don't see it yet. What? Oh, I see. I see it now. Guess what? I have a question mark in the margin there. Now I see why. Okay, yes, I don't think he could say that. Get carried away into his more existentialist side. Maybe that's why he could say to start, yeah, we're on the same wavelength, but he couldn't. Let's see. Okay, where are we? Authentic existential. So, now I say go to 305, but I don't know where we are yet, so I get to 305. Well, that's just, I marked that as the sort of anti-Sartre. I mean, Sartre thinks that Heidegger thinks that dwelling upon the end is what you should be doing, and Sartre's right. Dwelling on that end, that final moment is certainly how you're going to be wiped out by it. Certainly not what you should be doing. Neither dwelling on it as something awful or dwelling on it as something horrific. I mean, I keep listening lately to Bach. Many places where Bach is just thinking about his death. Schlage doch gewünschte Stunde, ring the final bell. That's really going to be terrific. And I think Heidegger would say that must be inauthentic. I mean, Bach is thinking, it's going to be even better in the next world, and the sooner we get out of this one, it sounds like he's saying, the better. It's a common theme in German music, and I guess a lot of poetry at the time. Well, that's equally bad. I mean, looking forward to your death is just as bad as dreading it. I mean, it's not a kind of event that you're supposed to have an attitude about. At least, I mean, it is an event of a sort, and you will have an attitude about it of a sort, but Heidegger's just not interested in what attitude you have about it. You're not supposed to be dwelling on it. You're supposed to be, in a certain sense, dwelling in it. It's supposed to color everything, whatever this death characteristic is, it's going to color your relation to everything. That's the next thing I want to say here. I get there quickly. That Well, I'll jump ahead. Death, this is something Hoagland picks out and makes a lot of fuss about, but it's important to say it here. Death, dying is a way of life for Heidegger. It's not something that happens to you at the end of your life. It's a general characteristic of Dasein, and authentically, you face up to it. This is the bottom of 289. It's always interesting to know where one is, how formalized one is. Oh, you see, you never know. This is supposed to be prior to 93, which is the preliminary sketch of an existential ontological structure of death. Yet, he seems to be saying something existential ontological here at the bottom of 289. Just as Dasein is already, it's not yet. I'm just reading that paragraph. And is, it's not yet constantly, as long as it lives, it is already its end too. The ending which we have in view when we speak of death does not signify Dasein's being at an end. That would be perishing or taking a stand on perishing by having which would be demise. Rather, it's a being towards the end. Death is a way to be, which Dasein takes over as soon as it is. And that's, I mean, you've got to get used to that. That's, where am I? About 5 lines from the bottom of 289. Death is a way to be, which Dasein takes over as soon as it is. And that means death is a way of behaving or comportment that colors everything you do and everything you see and how anything shows up for you. With nothing, there's nothing special about that final event. That final event is just a what? It's a kind of oh boy, I never can understand it. How can it be the non-relational state, for instance, is supposed to be a general characteristic of Dasein's dying all the time. But it can't be that Dasein is non-relational all the time. Every time I try to think about it, I end up tied in knots. You got any help? You think, how can non-relational be a way of life? Or is it because now you could always, I'm demonstrating why this chapter is so confusing, because now you could say, well, that's not really that's not even the preliminary sketch of an existential ontological structure of death. That's on 293. Who knows what that is? That's on 290, how the existential analysis of death is distinguished from other possible interpretations of this phenomenon. Now, maybe that makes it all right. Because it sometimes seems to me, or often seems to me, that what Heidegger is doing is gradually ontologizing and gradually taking back our understanding of death. And so 299, he hasn't got to the full existential conception of death. And even that may not be the final story. As I say, I don't know exactly, and I'm ready for anybody to come and tell me where exactly the final story is. By the time you get to the top of 311, you've got it all in there, in italic. You keep that little piece in mind whenever you get lost. Anticipation, I'm jumping ahead because anticipation, and he's jumping ahead because on 311 he really isn't ready to talk about anticipatory resoluteness because he hasn't done guilt yet, or am I lost? I get lost in his craziness. No, that's right. But let's do it anyway. Anticipation reveals to Dasein its lostness in the oneself and brings it face to face with the possibility of being itself, primarily unsupported by concern for solicitude. That fits the idea with nobody sort of being able to take your place, but of being itself rather in an impassioned freedom towards death, a freedom which has been released from illusions of the day and which is practical, certain of itself, and anxious. That's okay as long as you don't build into anxious the idea that all relations to others and fall away. So where was I? I was reading something. 311, yeah, but before that, I was saying I don't understand, I was saying how Heidegger can say that we are always in this being towards death. Where was I reading that? And yet say that being towards death is non-relational. Where is that? Well, somebody who must have been writing things down. Where was I before 311? Yeah. Well, I don't know what to say except that other human beings play no essential role in Dasein's way of being in the world. At the time if Dasein is on its deathbed, no, presumably all the time, but that can't be right because it's just, I can't tell anymore which is which.
So you're having a non-relational possibility. It can't be absolutely so. And then you have a being towards that.
Okay. Okay. So what's non-relational is that no one can take your place, and that's going to stay there no matter. Is that the possibility?
Non-relational.
Okay. And that you will always be related to in the way you live. And, yeah, okay. And so what's non-relational is not the way you live, but what now that insofar as you are living a relation to demise, you are alone, and is that right? And that's what's going to be.
Maybe not even that. What's not relational is that possibility, which the possibility is no one can take away from you.
The possibility of you having no more possibilities is a unique individual possibility. Okay. Yeah, that's the best way to hear it. That helped you. Yeah. Okay. Now I don't remember where I was, but it doesn't matter. I want to be on page 291 because I've been talking about demise, and I didn't know when to bring it in, but since it's in front of me, we'll put it in at this point. We want to distinguish perishing, which is this event that happens at the end of any living thing. I don't know whether it happens to germs, but it happens to mammals anyway. And perishing is not what he's talking about. And this is what he's saying on 291, about 15 lines down. The ending of that which lives we call perishing. Dasein has its death of the kind appropriate to anything that lives. That's the perishing. Insofar as this is the case, Dasein too can end without authentically dying. That is, whatever dying is, which is a way of facing up to the structure of Dasein, you can just live a life in which you never actually face up to the structure of Dasein, and then you end without dying. Though on the other hand, qua Dasein, it does not simply perish. We designate this intermediate phenomenon as demise. Now, that means that demise is the stand you take on the fact that you'll perish, I think. And that's an intermediate phenomenon in that it's not the perishing, but how perishing is an issue for you. And all Dasein are into that intermediate state. Even the ones who don't face up, I think, to they end without authentically dying. That's right. But even they don't just perish, I think, because just even having the attitude toward your possible perishing that you have if you're in Datman, that it won't happen for a while and maybe could never happen to you, and it's all in the future. Even that's a form of relating to your perishing already. So demise, I think, is the way that beings like us, who have to take a stand on their being and also the impossibility of their being, take a stand on it. You look worried. Is that right? Into demise. Really? Where? Right there. Well, but I wonder if that's really what, Dasein never perishes. Dasein, however, can demise only as long as it's dying. But now, metaphysical violence into, quote, demising. I think that's supposed to be not what he means by demising. That means really perishing, I guess. Let me see, can obtain results which may even become significant. What do you think? What would it be for medicine to have a view about the stand that you take on the possibility of having no more possibilities? I have no idea. But I see the sentence. Yeah.
Becoming a cultural master involves defining the style and way of love. Perhaps taking a stand on your death would depend in a similar way on the context of how we meet our demise, how long that takes, and what should happen. So medicine and understanding better how we meet our demise might understand better how we are.
Maybe. I just don't know what medicine could understand about how to meet our demise. They could try to keep you from being aware of it and so forth, but I don't think he's talking about that. I think the quotes around demising are pretty important. I think he thinks that what they really are investigating is perishing. But maybe not, because he goes on and says, sort of, maybe death and the sickness can be understood from a medical point of view as existential phenomenon. No, I don't know what it means. So, Tyler, you know what it means?
Demise is a intermediary thing. Demise is a way of taking a stand on something. To take that stand on a way of being or this?
I think demise is what happens at the end of a person's life, understood not as perishing, but as something that they've interpreted, and that's it. Demise is perishing plus having a stand on perishing in the way you live. It's an attitude toward an event of perishing. Yes. Let me think now. And yes, demise. Well, that's not quite right. It's the event of perishing, having a demise to it. I mean, having a interpretation to it. I mean, there is this event, this thing that happens to you finally when you have no more possibilities. There's how you relate to that thing. But it really is that thing. It is something that everything happens, and demise also happens at the end of your life. That's what I think. Do you think that's wrong? I think demising is something that really is in the future, but it's the future thing understood and taken over as whatever your existential way of doing it is. Curtis was going to come in on this. Yeah, go ahead. Wait, what? Well, wait a second then. Let's look where on the next paragraph. Let's look where in the next paragraph.
Well, the existential interpretation of death, a couple lines down, in any typology of dying as a characterization of conditions under which the demise is experienced, and as the way through which it is experienced. The concept of death is already further a psychology of dying gives information about the living of the person who is dying rather than about the dying itself. It simply reflects the fact that when Gosling dies, and even when it dies authentically, it does not have to do so with an experience of a practical demise or...
Well, I take that to be sort of on my side, right? I mean, the important thing is the practical demising is perishing under some interpretation, but what's important isn't perishing under some interpretation, it's the kind of life that has got the structure it's got because it's got a certain interpretation of perishing. Does that seem suitable? Okay, Curtis, your turn.
Body perish the Dasein demise.
What's it in the truth of what?
The Dasein demise. And not the other way around.
Organic stuff, yes. Bodies perish. And what do you have to add to perishing to get demising? Something only the Dasein can do. What? To do. I think.
It's a matter of how the knowledge is used. Demise is the end of Dasein. Perishing is the end of biological life.
That's all right, but what makes the end of Dasein different from the end of biological life is that it's been taken up into a Dasein life and given an interpretation. Okay, we agree about that. Yes. I think that just can't be right, because I think Heidegger thinks that demise is something that Dasein does. And it is an intermediate phenomenon. Yes, dying is, that's right. You're just adding one thing. There is perishing, which is what organisms do, and we do too. There is demise, which is a stand on what it is to be a perishing kind of creature, which we exhibit in our behavior. And then there's authentically dying, which is, so to speak, the right stand, which is not to cover it up, for instance. Whereas the way Das Man, the one deals with perishing, is already dealing with demise. It says demise happens to other people in the future, or perishing happens to other people in the future, and that's a way of dealing with perishing as a kind of demise, because you've already taken a stand on it in what you do. That's what I think, yeah. Passing away is a way to describe this intermediate phenomenon.
And it's an event at the end of your life.
Yes, but we have to add in there something like, and what is it that people can do at the end of their life called passing away? It's got to be something for which has been there, which has already affected how they live, something like that. Otherwise, I don't see the difference between passing away and perishing. There isn't much difference. He's making a big deal about the difference, though, isn't he? Dying is the way in which the being is towards its death. Accordingly, so that Dasein never perishes. However, it's a demise only as long as it's dying. And dying is what? It's the way of being in which Dasein is towards its death. That's what I'm trying to get. I mean, the way of being it is, well, everybody's got something to say about this. Let's see. Stephen, you haven't said anything.
Demise is Dasein interpreting existentially used.
I see. But you're making it seem as if somehow demising. I mean, maybe this is right, but I'm on the wrong track then. I thought demise was an okay term, but demise describes even the end of authentic Dasein, doesn't it? I mean, all the Dasein demises, all Dasein perish too, but those are two different things. Dasein perish as organisms that come to the end, and Dasein demises as an already interpreted version, a version of what it is for a Dasein to come to the end. I'm still holding on to that. Wait, I think I gotta worry. I want to go back to this just because I don't think we're going to get any further, and I've got a lot of further to get. So if say something, but I may not say anything in return.
Because Dasein can end without authentic dying. I think that.
Wait, Dasein can end with no. Well, that's the other view, the one I'm denying. So we have to find some. But I want to say all Dasein, even authentic Dasein, demises. This is the question. You're saying, no, that inauthentic Dasein demises, but authentic Dasein dies and doesn't demise. Authentic Dasein demises and dies, and we haven't really gotten to the now you're looking unhappy, Curtis? Yeah, okay, good. That makes me happy. And so does Eugene. So do a lot of people. I'm quitting while I'm ahead. Okay. So I'm going back to this. Where are we now? This is the sense in which you dwell. What I'm trying to say is you dwell in it, not on it. Then you're dying. Then you're not only perishing, but you are living an authentic attitude toward the fact that you're a kind of being that perishes. Let me see what I say is from 306 that I want to talk about something. Well, I just says that being towards death is a possibility. I don't see why that's important. And it's a way of living the fact, or living the structural possibility of the impossibility of any existence at all, he says on 307. It's not just a way of relating to perishing, but it's a way of relating to perishing as the impossibility of any existence at all, and a specific way of doing that, I think, that we were talking about. let's see now if I want to say anything more. I'm just summing up where I thought we got more or less an agreement. Yeah, I think that's okay. So then I write anxiety gets it right on 310. Let's see what that is. So the anxiety is just being introduced there on 310 in italics as the Dasein finds itself face to face with the nothing of the possible impossibility of its existence. That's, I was going to mention, that's the anxiety of death. There's going to be, I mentioned this once before, but keep your eye open for 3 kinds of anxiety. This one, which just gets defined, there's an anxiety that goes with choice, in which you make a choice, a furious choice, while getting married to one person, excludes all the other people you might have married, and that's an anxious making, I think, for him. You'll see the choice one, I don't remember where it is, it goes by very fast on one page. He doesn't care about that kind of choice. And then there's the anxiety of guilt, which we've already talked about. How can I sum up the anxiety of guilt? That partly that you can't get behind your throwness, but I don't think that's the whole thing. Well, it is that you can't get behind your throwness, and that means that everything that might have been guidelines for your existence turns out to be ungrounded. And that's the anxiety of guilt. You can't make explicit what it is to be an authentic person. You just do it. And then there's the anxiety of death now. It's what you feel or the experience of the possibility of the impossibility of your existence. And then we're right back on page 311, which is so important to me, because it says that anxiety can't be depression. I've said this to Bill Blattner, because it turns out that anxiety is a disposedness that Dasein, authentic Dasein, is always in. That's the end of that long thing where it says freedom toward death, a freedom which has been released from the illusions of the day, which is practical, certain of itself, and anxious. That's what you've got when you've got anticipatory resoluteness. That's the kind of life, the kind of experience you're having of your life. I got stuck on this earlier thing again, rereading that. Every time you hear one of these things, it looks different. The top of 311, I go back to the beginning of that italics. Anticipation reveals to Dasein its lostness in the they self and brings it face to face with the possibility of being itself primarily unsupported by concernful solicitude. I can see that's just a generalization of that nobody can help you out when you're dying, but it's getting toward the wrong one, the strong one that Eugene mentioned. It sounds too isolated and too much like you don't want any, that if you're really got this basic attitude toward demise, if it's demise and this is your attitude toward it, put it that way, then you're all alone and you're always anxious, and it sounds so heroic, nihilist, existentialist, which is what it's always risking turning into. That's why it's important to read the Carol White chapter that I gave you, my version of Carol White, because she's the antidote to that. She's the one who's trying to say, in effect, that's much too personal, existential, isolated, and so forth. If you want to ontologize death, it's got to be a much more general phenomena. It's got to be, I'll just say it, the possibility of world collapse in your world or a cultural world collapse, and it's got to be that possibility taken over in a positive way. Only if you're in the world disclosing business, then the fact that your world collapses, if you do it right, isn't a bad thing at all. It gives you another chance. One way my slogan is, you've got to die in order to be reborn, which is that kind of Paulian way, Christian way of thinking about it. But this is much too much a dark side, because you don't get the sense how important it is that your world could collapse, and that you could then that's the vulnerability. the possibility that your identity could collapse, that your world could collapse. It isn't just that you're going to perish someday and you'll find yourself in the middle of perishing. And then you can make more sense of how this could be a positive thing, and being anxious could be a positive thing, but you can't make much sense about why you don't have any support and concern for solicitude. That just seems too strong. I want to say something more about that, just a second. Yeah, I brought along a book I wanted to show you and tell you at some point. If you want another slant on the sort of later Heidegger, or the more formal, more ontological issue of world collapse and how to deal with world collapse, and you want to sort of echo of John Hoagland actually applied, there's this interesting book. Has anybody seen this Radical Hope by Jonathan Lear, who's a philosopher at Northwestern? University of Chicago. And what it's about is the collapse of the world of the Crow Indians when they were suddenly taken out of their world where they were hunting animals and scalping enemies and put on a reservation so that nothing anymore was worth doing or made any sense because they couldn't do all the things that they used to do, which were heroic and worth doing. And then what Lear is interested in is how does this world collapse get taken up, and what is it's the Crow Indians' way of doing it versus Sitting Bull's way of doing it, and John Hoagland is playing a big role in this, and therefore Heidegger is playing a big role in this at second hand. Because what Jonathan Lear is trying to understand is how the truth of the Crow Indians was able to help them from despair in the face of world collapse. And if you read it, and you'll see, you get a very interesting sense of, I have to tell you, there's going to be a discussion on this at the American Philosophical Association meeting in March. And what I'm going to talk about anyway is the fact that Hoagland and Lear don't make a very important distinction. You can't tell when he says world collapse, let's do it with buffalo burgers, which is the way he does it. There are no more buffalo, so you can't have any buffalo burgers. That just means that sort of something in your world is missing and you feel bad about it, and you can feel nostalgic for the good old days when there was buffalo burgers. That's not the Heidegger way of thinking about it. That's probably Jonathan Lear's way of thinking about it. But when Hoagland, toward the beginning of the book, is thinking about it in a much more Heideggerian way, where it's not meaningful anymore what these Indians do. The whole world of meanings that supports, never mind buffalo burgers now, but hunting buffalo and so forth, isn't just that there are no more buffalo to hunt. Maybe that is the real problem, but the way Hoagland sets up the problem, it means that you can't understand anymore even why you would want to hunt buffalo. And it's a big difference. Try to think of it this way, that if you've got real world collapse, and not just you can't find any more buffalo to hunt and eat, real world collapse, you won't have any nostalgia for the good old days when you had buffalo and you could hunt them and eat them. And why won't you have, and that's what Sitting Bull had. So why won't you have that kind of nostalgia? Because if it was real world collapse, the whole meaningfulness of the world would be gone. And I'll give you two examples. Suppose it's like falling out of love. The one thing you could just not be able to get the loved one. I'm stuck in Kierkegaard's Urn Trembling, of course. But anyway, falling out of love is different. You can't understand why you ever wanted them. And you don't feel nostalgic about getting them back. What would you do with them if you got them back? Well, they're just boring people like everybody else, and so forth. So, and this big distinction is you've got to keep in mind if you're thinking about what's happening in the death chapter. The death chapter isn't about some things just happening to become impossible, like buffalo burgers. It's about a way of life, your way of life, becoming unintelligible. Let me get this across with another one. The Hoagland example, which is about science. When Newtonian science collapses and you get Einsteinian, or when Aristotle, it's even more dramatic, sort of stopped working for the medievals and Newton takes over. It isn't as if people feel nostalgic for the good old Aristotelian days or the good old Newtonian days. But nobody can even understand why anybody would have believed such a weird thing as that there's the sublunar sphere and the superlunar sphere and things are seeking their natural place in the middle of the earth. What kind of nonsense is that once you've got Newtonian? And so, and what this whole chapter is about, this is sort of the Hoagland Carol White point, is that in your life, and that's the falling in love kind of example, or in the culture, and that would be like what happened to the Indians, if you understand it one way. Never mind, the Indians are so confused because of Jonathan Lear. What happens in the culture, let's try this, the medieval understanding that we're all creatures of God goes away, and you get the modern understanding, thanks to Descartes, we're all self-sufficient subjects. Then nobody's supposed to be, who's not in the modern world, nobody's going to be nostalgic for the good old days when the hills were enchanted and we were all creatures of God. Couldn't even understand why anybody would believe such a thing, or if they can make even if it makes sense to believe such a thing. Now comes the point. It's not clear in Being and Time how, when you're thinking about individual world collapse, which is the possibility of no more possibility, you're thinking of perishing with the spin on it that it's turned into demise because you've got to stand toward it. Or are you thinking of a kind of dying that could happen when you lost your cultural background, or fallen out of love, when your identity has collapsed, or your personal world collapses, or your social world, or your scientific world? What's confusing is Heidegger sometimes seems to have gotten up to the level at which it's so abstract and formal and ontological that he can deal with any form of world collapse. And then it becomes the possibility of no more possibilities. And that doesn't mean on your deathbed. That means when your world is gone or your sense of who you are is gone. You can get it by even having a mission that fails, but you can get it even by having a mission that succeeds. When Martin Luther King, let's suppose, really gets justice for the black people, and he's been on the mountain, and he's seen the promised land and all that, and he's ready to die. It doesn't matter anymore. He says all that. And then but suppose he didn't die. Well, then he's sort of lost, because the world collapse doesn't really mean that somehow bad things happen to the world. It just means that your world doesn't give you anything to do anymore. So and Martin Luther King was sort of lost for a while, and then he became anti-Vietnam War, and he didn't do that very well because there were no peace marches to call and so forth. It didn't, and so I think world collapse is so general, and supposed to be so general when Heidegger's doing it right. And this is what I tried to say in the thing I gave out, that anything that causes your world of significance, which grabs you and tells you what's important to do and what's not important to do and what you've got to do now and what you don't have to worry about because it's trivial, when that disappears, however it disappears, that's the kind of thing that death is. And demise, I think, is just a special case of it. And Heidegger got all too much entangled because describing what happens to people, so to speak, on their deathbed when they're not just perishing but demising, and worrying about, and he could have been worrying about the very general case of what can happen to a Dasein that's revealed in anxiety, namely that their world can collapse. And what attitude one should, now this is, I'm preparing next time without realizing it. What stance should one take in the light of the possibility of world collapse on all these levels? That's called anticipatory resoluteness. How should you live being the kind of being who has to have a world and who has to have a world of the sort that can collapse? That's the really big question for next time. Yeah.
The possibility of that the possibility of it. It's not the concept. It's not the event of it.
That's right. That's right. Good.
I'm still
Yes. Good. Good. So what I think, if I understood you right, is I think that he's talking about this very general thing about Dasein, that its world can collapse, even though it's not, and he can do it several times in the course of its life, but he gets hooked on a kind of paradigm case of world collapse, which is this thing that happens to people at the end of their life. But I think that when he gets it really formalized, namely the possibility of having no more possibilities, that can happen to the Crow Indians, and I think he should stay at that level. And one thing is sure, and again, read the thing that Carol White is so good on. Heidegger later is more interested in the death of civilizations than he is in the death of Dasein. What's the connection? Well, civilizations can collapse where it doesn't mean anything anymore to do whatever they were doing. And that ought to fall under this. And yet, this chapter you're reading, and it's the one we should be paying attention to, and I'll go back to it now to paying attention to it, is certainly using demise, this one time, what does he say, unget-aroundable, what I always say, inevitable thing that's going to happen to Dasein. It's not inevitable that your identity is going to collapse, your love is going to collapse, your world is going to collapse, your science is going to collapse, but there's something inevitable, namely the thing that happens when you're on your deathbed. Now you want to say something.
When we talk about death and demise, death is all life.
Yes, okay, right. Yes, good, yes, that's right. Death, an example, a paradigm case. Demise is a paradigm case of world collapse, but the possibility of having no more possibilities is not an event. Okay, but I'm a little worried because in a certain way, world falling out of love and getting from the medieval to the modern world is an event. It takes a while, but so is dying sometime. And it's a funny kind of event. I wrote something about that. Let me look back then because I skipped it. Because it's not an event and yet it is an event. But the possibility of that is okay. The possibility of that is not an event.
The possibility of that.
Okay, that's right. So you should, whenever you hear about the possibility of no more possibilities, you should think of the vulnerability of your identity, of your culture, of your life. That vulnerability is not an event. See, that's what you're saying, right? The event is the actual collapse of those things, and that happens too. And okay, now, well, I don't know what to think. Okay, well, you had your hand up every once in a while.
Part of maybe demise and dying, but I mean, is for example, world collapse in the general sense that you're talking about, is that also non-relational as well?
No, and that's one of the problems. I think you're pointing at a problem from a kind of angle. Namely, if you make this event that happened at the end of people's lives your paradigm, you've got to be careful of what you say about it. For instance, you couldn't say it's non-relational. I don't know what it means for, a culture collapsing being non-relational or falling out of love. Maybe that's non-relational, I'm not sure. But, well, there are certain, what I would like anyway is that he could give us the general ontological condition of how, of any case in which the world becomes impossible. And tell us how we could live in such a way that we are constantly expressing in what we're doing that we're the kind of creatures whose world can become impossible. That's what he should be doing. But if he sticks to the example of what happens on your deathbed, then I don't think non-relational is the right thing to say. I also don't think inevitable is the right thing to say, because some people get through their whole lives without any collapse except for the one at the end of it. Whereas, and therefore, inevitable, and You say it's inevitable that cultures collapse? I'm not sure. I don't know. It's not as inevitable as, I mean, it does seem to have been the case, though time is going on pretty well still after several thousand years. So you have to look, if you're interested in this, as you read it, ask yourself, which of these characteristics of death or dying are applicable only to the event at the end of people's lives, and which are general enough and ontological enough that they apply to a kind of being who, as long as it is vulnerable to a collapse of all that makes its life meaningful. What gives it a world, what gives it significance, that's constantly vulnerable. Yeah.
The mind, the Dasein as the visualizing aspect of the mind, is that part of the hermeneutic that you think is necessary for kind of reaching the authenticity, the general sense of the general?
That's interesting. Funny, I have a kind of deja vu feeling that you've asked me this question before in some version, but I'll be thinking about it in a minute. Ask it again. I got sidetracked by my feeling that I'd heard it before. Say it again.
Paradigmatic case, which is demise, is necessary for the hermeneutic, general part of formal education, to get to a general understanding.
Actually, that's a good question.
Already have a good grip on demise, and that'd be his way into, or not his way into, a general understanding.
That's good. That would be the right way to do it. To start with the cover-up, namely perishing, and then see that that's not the question, but that demise is the question, but that's not the event, that's not an event necessarily at the end of your life. You may have several, then you generalize some more. There is that event at the end of your life, and it's inevitable, but you're still doing hermeneutic formal indication, and you see that that's still not the phenomenon. That's not a cover-up anymore, but that's not the right whole story. Then you see that even cultures can die and so forth, and then you finally get to the basic realization that there's a certain kind of being who has to have a world and has to have significance and can lose it, and then you finally see that that's what the essential feature we're going to call death is. But that's covered up in several stages, and we've uncovered it in several stages. I'm answering you, right? So, okay. Now, let me go on for a while, because I'm going to discover that it's 4:30 and I haven't even covered half of what I want to cover. So I think we've got a lot of it covered, but let me look. Did we look at 291, which is where I claim? I think we did. Oh, yeah, we did that. That's fine. It's Dasein and demise is not an event. But look at this. I've written this down now, seem to contradict myself. Demise is not an event, not a future event. That's true, because it's not something that you can ever experience your own demise. Remember, we talked about that. So this is an argument about demise, particularly, that it has this peculiar character of not being, because I said it's wrong it's a cover-up, that demise is something that happens in the future. And we've been saying, oh yeah, but if demise is perishing, but from a certain perspective, then it looks like it is something that happens in the future. And I think he's got an interesting view about that. So let me look. I think he thinks, well, viewed, so to speak, from the outside, and not as something that you're experiencing, demise is an event that happens in people's future, and it's an event that will happen in your future. But it's never something that will actually happen in your future, because when it happens, you'll be dead, and you can't experience it as an event. And he's got that in mind on 284. I don't know why I think it's important, but so let's see now, at the end of the top paragraph. Dasein is not an event. It's a phenomenon to be understood existentially, and to be understood in a distinctive sense, which must still be, okay, so let me see now. Dying is not an event. Is that about demise? Is that telling us that demise is not an event? Certainly dying is not an event, if that means it's being always vulnerable. But I think he thinks that even demise isn't an event. Let me see if I can find it. Look on 295. Yes, that's the. There's a peculiar way, I think, I'm just trying to say this, in which world collapse is unintelligible. Because when you're in it, you can't make any sense out of it, and you're either in a world or you're lost, and then there's a kind of leap, and you're in another world. Let me see if I find it 295, and then you can say something, Chris. And so I want to say something about. Yeah. Well, yes, it's this weird stuff on 294 in the paragraph that has 251 written beside it. As an ability to be Dasein cannot outstrip the possibility of death. Death is the possibility of the absolute impossibility of Dasein. Thus, death reveals itself as that possibility which is one's own most, which is non-relational, not to be outstripped. As such, death is something distinctively impending. So that's a funny thing. That's what I got puzzled about. Certainly, everything is just plain something impending. But demise is something distinctively impending. What I want to say is, you can't even imagine it happening. It's not something you can expect or await or even avoid. That's why you cover it up with this everything which you can expect and be afraid of and avoid and so forth. Since you can't imagine what it would be like not to be in love with this person while you are, or what it would be like not to be a modern person while you are, there's a sense in which you can't really have a sense of that in collapse as something that's going to happen in the future, because you can't have a sense of what that collapse is. The collapse makes no sense. That's what the collapse of all intelligibility, though it actually happens, can't be something you can think about. Wow, what would it happen if all the meaning of being me would disappear? So that's the sense in which it's distinctively impending. You can say, yes, it could always happen. It can happen any time. It could happen right away. And you can't picture that it could happen at all. You're looking puzzled.
I realize, but I don't think the distinction between dying and lying.
Okay, I keep mixing them up, you say. I think you think. Okay.
Dying
yes.
is definitely not philosophical sense.
Yes, dying is a kind of way of acting. It's a way of life. Dying is a way of life. Dying is what anticipatory resoluteness is a name for that way of life. That's dying. Right. Everything is we just croaking, and demise is what?
World collapsing.
World collapsing, right. As opposed to the possibility of world collapsing, I take it. Yes. So the ontological structure of death is the constant possibility of world collapse. When there is something called world collapse, I don't know what his name for it is. What, dying? No. We just use dying. Right. So what is the name for actual world collapsing? That must...
Well, that's part of the confusion. I don't know whether you can reserve in dying for a certain time that happens during your life and demise.
Okay. Demise, it seems, is a stand you take on perishing, at least the way it comes up when he introduces it. And maybe we should think that also gets generalized. So that after all, we talked about that, cultures can die, and so forth. So demise better be a name for the event of world collapsing. That's right. Yes, it's sort of terminal world collapsing. Yes. Okay. So let's get that for everybody. Demise is terminal world collapsing. Dying is a way of life in the face of the possibility of terminal world collapsing. Sounds right. Okay. Wait, now where are you? Where? Okay, now. Okay, we designate the intermediate phenomenon as demise. What's the phenomenon? What's that? It's between perishing and world collapsing. World collapsing is dying. This event at the end of people's lives is perishing. And in between, I guess I'm all right, is is the actual, not the possibility, I misspoke again, didn't I? Yes, the possibility of world collapsing, I keep wondering. Dying is living a certain way of life which takes account of the constant possibility of world collapsing. That's right. Then there is this intermediate phenomenon, actual world collapsing. Then there is this a terminal phenomena for organisms and maybe for culture too. What? No, but demise we need. Demise is world collapsing, right? And being on your deathbed and ceasing to be alive is a case of world collapsing actually happening, which we call demise. It's a special case of world collapsing, I think. Does that make sense? It's the kind that happens to people on their deathbed. We didn't say that last time. We said any time a culture dies, it's a demise.
Maybe that, there's a thing called terminal world collapsing, and they call it demise. And there's other
Yeah. Okay.
Whether all other kinds of world collapsing.
Yeah, I think he doesn't, because the way he set it up, demise seems to be taking a stand on perishing. And if that's true, then he thinks only this special terminal one is demise. And then we just haven't got a word for a world collapse, have we? I mean, if we sort it out that way, we need a word for what happens to you when everything that gave your life meaning goes away. What? Dying. Dying is a way of acting. Now I got you confused. Okay, that's bad. Yes, you're right. You're right. You're right. The demise is, but then again, you keep saying it the way that's confusing. Demise is not a stance you take on world collapsing. Demise is world collapsing viewed in a certain way. There's not another, I misspoke. Sorry. Demise is perishing viewed in a certain way. Perishing is an event that happens to organisms at the end of their life. That very event, taken up and interpreted and lived in a certain way, is still at the end of, it's something that happens at the end of people's lives. That's he's going to call perishing. But dying is a way of life, namely how you integrate into your life not only the possibility of that kind of perishing, but the general possibility of having no more possibilities. Is that all right? I think that, I wish he did, but I think in fact he's got demise on his mind in here, which is a special kind of terminal world collapse, which is happens to people on their deathbed, but within an interpretation. But here's my question, and then we've got to stop going around in this. What is his term for this more general ontological absolute possibility of no more possibilities, which could cover world collapsing and this deathbed phenomenon? I don't know it. That's death. Maybe that's death. Okay, I think you're right. Maybe we should write that on the board. Now we may have because I've never understood how to sort all these out. So there's perishing, there's demise. I don't know how to spell it, but that's all right for the moment. There's possibility of no more possibilities. And what is that death? No. Death is it? What did we come up with as death?
We're going to be able to think about the concept of death. I think you defined it as the possibility.
That's death. Okay, let's try that. And and that means this is also possible world collapse, right? Possible world collapse. Okay, and now we've got actual world collapse. And what's the name? You said the name for that is death. That's what's confusing me now. Actually, we don't have a name for actual world collapse. Where's this possible? I thought it was a big breakthrough to put death down here. And I think possibility of no more possibilities is dying, isn't it? Dying is a way of being, right? Possibility is no more. Which of these is death? Death is a possibility of no more of no more possibilities. So maybe Curtis is right, since he doesn't care about this. I mean, you need to talk about world collapse. Up here, Harrison gives you the event to talk about, and this gives you the event interpreted. This gives you the structure. It looks like you would want to have a name for the more general event that this is a special case of, where if this is what happens to individual Daseins on their deathbed, this is something that can happen to cultures and everything. What do you think? Yeah.
Everything at the end of life, right?
Yes. Yes. Anyway, let's put that up here. End of life. And here's the end of Dasein. And this is death. Okay, down here is the possibility of absolutely no more possibility. What word do you have?
So that world collapse.
You want to put for world collapse. He never says that. But that's all right. We say that.
Having no more possibilities. Your whole world breaks down and you can't have another. That's different world. You can have another world.
That's right. It's not terminal. That's what's interesting about this is the possibility of no more possibilities, and this is death, and this is terminal. Well, this isn't terminal because this is a possibility of no more possibilities. If this refers to this is terminal, right? This is a possibility, and this is actual world collapse, which is like a revolution, and we don't have a name for it. But it's we call it world collapse. And it's notice, by the way, it's terminal in a certain sense. I mean, it's the end of that whole mode of intelligibility. You can't get it back and so forth. But it's not terminal for the culture, for the person undergoing it, because they can do it several times. They can fall in love and collapse. What? Yes.
Yeah, so world collapse that's the confusing thing. It can happen for anxiety and that can happen.
Yeah, but what's interesting is the structure of this one, which is really the important one. I mean, this one is just an instance of this one. Of course, the most... What's that? World collapse is before demise. You mean it's more general when there's up here? Okay. I don't...
During your life. You can think that's what you can get. World collapse doesn't imply that both that.
Okay, well, and I suppose, yeah.
If you want to make it stronger, you can say world collapse is the end of you, right? That's why.
The end of you, well, okay, possibility of a world collapse of you. That's right. And then you have to get a new, that indeed Dasein can go through these ends of you several times with anxiety, falling out of love, losing all your chance to hunt buffalo and so forth. Okay. Dying, that's right. Let's put it in there. Dying, we said, was here. It's the way of life it's a way of life that takes account of this, right? In all your behaving. We'll see that clearer next time. Takes account of vulnerability, ability to world collapse. This is dying, right? So let's put the dying over here. Somebody write this down for me so I know what I've committed myself to. If anybody can read it, let me try to read it. Perishing, the end of life. Demise is the end of, what have I got here? Dasein. Okay, end of Dasein. The possibility of no more possibilities. That's death. That's possible world collapse. Dying is a way of life. It's a way of life that takes account of the vulnerability to world collapse. And then finally, there is something actual world collapse, the end of you, for which we don't seem to have a word other than actual world collapse. Is that okay? Did you write this down, or could you please? Okay. Now I'm going to go on. If there is any place to go on from here, let's see. 15 minutes, I'd see how much I have to cover. Yeah, I think I can do this. Back to them. Alzheimer's a way of life. That's just where I have, just where it could be. Okay, let's try this. Now, just as guilt is supposed to make possible, oh yeah, this is a puzzle for me. I'm giving this really as a course or a seminar or something that's supposed to help me understand this stuff. So, and you are helping me. I mean, just think of it. All this is going to go into the second edition of the commentary. All right, it's helped a lot. Now, I need help with the following. The final move that Heidegger makes, we're back to formal indication now, and we're back to guilt. It turns out that the cover-up story is made possible by and motivated by the true story. That is, so this ontological guilt, he says, is the condition of the possibility of owing people money, of doing bad things which you feel guilty about, of having caused a loss which you now have to fix. Why is the fact that you can't get behind your throwiness and that there is no ground for what you're doing the condition of the possibility of the ordinary meaning of guilt, where that doesn't mean now that it motivates bad meaning. We saw that. That's right. Fleeing motivates the cover-up by telling you that there are all kinds of laws that you better not violate. But how does this ontological structure called guilt make possible the everyday understanding of guilt? I hope somebody knows, because every year I go through and I don't know, and you guys are supposed to help me. And why you can't figure that one out, think how much harder the next one is. So it looks like dying, that is, living, where's dying now? Here. Living a life that takes account of vulnerability ought to make demise possible. Yes. The thing that you started with in your formal indication as what everybody thinks is guilt, and now the thing that everybody thinks is death, namely the event that happens to you at the end of your life, in which your world collapses for good, it looks like that meaning that everybody's got, that there is this event and it ends your life, and you have no more possibilities, ought to be, start again. The fact that you are vulnerable and that you can express in your behavior your vulnerability, and then you live in anticipatory resoluteness. That's the structure, the ontological structure. How does that make possible having a sense of demise, that is, having an interpretation of your parroting as demise? Maybe when I say it, it doesn't sound so crazy as I thought. So why do we understand perishing as demise? But not only because we're fleeing, and, nobody stopped me, that's nonsense. Now let's start again. Why do we understand the end of our life as demise? That's the question. And the answer is supposed to be because structurally we are the condition of the possibility of our understanding the end of our life as demise is that we are vulnerable to world collapse. And I'm beginning to believe that there's something here. Why are we thinking of our perishing as special, not just like all animals perishing? It's because we are the beings who are vulnerable to world collapse, and now you read that back in, and you are led to interpret perishing as something special, namely demise, namely world collapse. So I'm just working it out. So what the formal indication finally discovered that death really was, namely the possibility of no more possibilities, gets read back into perishing and demise, meaning we come up with the idea that what death is really about is an event in which there are no more. Is this an event? Yes, this is an event, isn't it? Demise, the end of Daseining, it's an event, and this is an event. Dying. No, the actual world collapse. So when we come to understand that there is an actual possibility of world collapse, and when we understand that living in it is death, then now we ought to get to, then we understand why, almost getting it, why we have to take a stand on perishing and why we just don't perish like animals. It's got to do with with ontological structure that we discovered is somehow making us able to see our perishing as a special thing. I just about got it. Is in each case mine. The possibility of world collapse, demise, ending of Dasein, event, okay, let's say each case mine. That makes it demise. It's what happens to me. To my death, on my deathbed. Well, yeah, I mean, that helps. Now, I wish we'd gotten as far as that with guilt. We didn't, did we? Nobody came up with an idea why the fact that you can't get behind your throniness and everything is ungrounded makes possible owing people things and feeling guilty. I just don't know what to say about that. You want to say something about it?
Suddenly die, you don't have an opportunity to have a world collapse. Because
yes, you can. Yes, I think that's right. You can perish without actually dying. Doesn't he just say that?
On our death, we are a way of being towards death. That's the only.
You said Dasein can. Wait. You said we can. The sentence says that we can perish only while we're dying.
No, Dasein can't.
That's right. Good. Dasein can demise. Dasein can demise only as long as it's dying. Did we write ever dying on here? Dying is, where's dying? No, you're dying, fine. Okay. Dasein demise only as long as it's dying. Yeah, that makes sense to me. That is, if it's living in a life that takes account of its vulnerability to world collapse, which is exactly the issue for next time. The life is called anticipatory resoluteness, but we don't know what that is yet. As long as it's living this kind of life, then it can understand that it's not an animal that perishes, but it's got a special way of perishing, which is going to be called demise. Is that what you're just saying? And that fits the line you just read. That's okay. Ooh, that's okay. So, and I think I've just come to the end of what I want to say here, and I think dying makes demise possible. Is that what did you just read? 291?
Yes.
That's the next thing in my notes. How nice. Okay, now let me see. I got only two more sentences. The logical one. So I'm just repeating myself. What we need now is to describe the way the permanent possibility of no more possibility permeates my life. That's what we call dying. That's anticipatory resoluteness, and that's what we're going to read for next time. And also, I think it would help if everybody read the paper I gave out. Now that you've heard all this, you'll see how that'll sort of crystallize in your mind what we've been talking about. Anything else anybody needs to say? You want to make the last remark? It's okay with me. Yeah.
World class, when in death, that's the possibility of no possibilities, and there's no more clear intuition.
Well, you mean
Like,
you mean death on your deathbed is because you can experience the collapse of your world, of your love, of medieval science, of all these things, and what you can't experience, what's special about what happens on your deathbed is that it wipes you out even more completely. I mean, I had something written about that, but I didn't talk about it. It looks like there's something that has to be around even after your world collapses, and that's this minimal thing of mindness and that it is and has to be. Those are the two ways he describes minimal Dasein. And what happens in, so to speak, embarrassing kind of death, which really wipes you out. You even get wiped out as that it is and has to be, and a minus and so forth. That's important in a funny way, because that shows that there's something special about this paradigm case of what happens to you on your deathbed. But it seems that we couldn't pay attention to that. If we're looking for a general ontological structural understanding of death, it shouldn't emphasize the peculiar kind of terminalness of death. Because you can have terminal death for cultures and for science too, but they're not as terminal as what happens to people on their deathbed. They just don't get another chance to have another world. Okay, so it looks like there are, and there are probably more, sort of asymmetries that get him into trouble, that he should take this event on the deathbed as the paradigm case. And you put your finger on the main one, I think. And yeah, okay, Eugene gets the last word. That's fine with me. We still have 4 minutes. Good. We need a final crunching thing. Let's hope this is it. And, okay, well, let's see that. Of death may now be defined. Death at the end of Dasein is Dasein's own most possibility, non-relational, certain, self-definite, not to be outstripped. Death is as Dasein's end in the being of its entity towards this end.
That's the full final.
Okay?
That's the full thing.
Death is, and it's the same thing that gets spelled out with all that, with anxiety thrown in, you mean, when I said, is that before or after that other one? No, it's the same thing that comes up on 311, in other words. Is that right? No, well, maybe not. Wait, let's stop and think about this a minute. I think what's interesting is, one of them, the top of 303, is about some definition of what death is, and the top of 311 is about anticipatory resoluteness. It's about how you live that structure. You write that down. So 303 is about the structure of death, and that means 311 is about dying, as we put it on the board. How you live it. Yeah, 311 is authentic dying, right? Okay. And 303 is the structure that authentic dying has to live. That is anticipatory resoluteness. Okay. Did you write that down? Okay, good. So, see you next week.